what we could.
You're not doing any harm to me. I'm happy to share with the group here.
Where?
All right.
Combo.
Thank you.
Does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, give me just a second because I gotta organize a little bit to make sure I catch anybody else that's coming in. So great, thank you, everybody. I mentioned to Jim a few weeks ago that I had really started becoming a fan of Stoicism, and I found a lot of interesting parallels between philosophy of Stoicism and some of the practices and Christian principles. And he suggested that would be something I'd want to share. So it was kind of fun putting this together, just with some of my thoughts. So I'd like this to be kind of a discussion. There might be other people out there who are practicing Stoicism or pieces of it. I think it's very consistent with Christian faith. And so we'll start with a little bit of an overview of kind of what it is here and what it is not.
You've been stranded thousands of miles from home with no money or possessions. Such a predicament would make many people despair and curse their awful fate. But for Zeno of Cyprus, it became the foundation of his life's work and legacy. The once wealthy merchant lost everything when he was shipwrecked in Athens around 300 BCE. With not much else to do, he wandered into a bookshop, became intrigued by reading about Socrates, and proceeded to seek out and study with the city's noted philosophers. As Zeno began educating his own students, he originated the philosophy known as Stoicism, whose teachings of virtue, tolerance, and self-control have inspired generations of thinkers and leaders. The name Stoicism comes from the Stoa Poikile, the decorated public colonnade where Zeno and his disciples gathered for discussion. Today, we colloquially use the word Stoic to mean someone who remains calm under pressure and avoids emotional extremes. But while this captures important aspects of Stoicism, the original philosophy was more than just an attitude. The Stoics believed that everything around us operates according to a web of cause and effect, resulting in a rational structure of the universe, which they called logos. And while we may not always have control over the events affecting us, we can have control over how we approach things. Rather than imagining an ideal society, the Stoic tries to deal with the world as it is, while pursuing self-improvement through 4 cardinal virtues. Practical wisdom, the ability to navigate complex situations in a logical, informed, and calm manner. Temperance, the exercise of self-restraint and moderation in all aspects of life. Justice, treating others with fairness even when they have done wrong. And courage, not just in extraordinary circumstances, but facing daily challenges with clarity and integrity. As Seneca, one of the most famous Roman Stoics, wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." But while Stoicism focuses on personal improvement, it's not a self-centered philosophy. At a time when Roman laws considered slaves as property, Seneca called for their humane treatment and stressed that we all share the same fundamental humanity. Nor does Stoicism encourage passivity. The idea is that only people who have cultivated virtue and self-control in themselves can bring positive change in others. One of the most famous Stoic writers was also one of Rome's greatest emperors. Over the course of his 19-year reign, Stoicism gave Marcus Aurelius the resolve to lead the empire through 2 major wars while dealing with the loss of many of his children. Centuries later, Marcus's journals would guide and comfort Nelson Mandela through his 27-year imprisonment during his struggle for racial equality in South Africa. After his release and eventual victory, Mandela stressed peace and reconciliation, believing that while the injustices of the past couldn't be changed, his people could confront them in the present and seek to build a better, more just future. Stoicism was an active school of philosophy for several centuries in Greece and Rome. As a formal institution, it faded away, but its influence has continued to this day. Christian theologians such as Thomas Aquinas have admired and adopted its focus on the virtues, and there are parallels between Stoic ataraxia, or tranquility of mind, and the Buddhist concept of nirvana. One particularly influential Stoic was the philosopher Epictetus, who wrote that suffering stems not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. This has resonated strongly with modern psychology and the self-help movement. For example, rational emotive behavioral therapy focuses on changing the self-defeating attitudes people form about their life circumstances. There's also Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. Informed by Frankl's own time as a concentration camp prisoner, logotherapy is based on the Stoic principle that we can harness our willpower to fill our lives with meaning, even in the bleakest situations.
What?
Doing my TED Talks.
Okay, so I think that summarizes a lot of good things. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing here. Hold on. Yeah. Oh, there we go. That looks a little better. I think you heard from a lot of the kind of the main Stoic authors here, and kind of as the video points out, Stoicism isn't the absence of feeling, but many people who are practicing Stoics appear to have less feeling because they're not reacting all the time to things that happen. They don't tend to have sort of wild reactions. And Epictetus is one of the kind of the main principles of gurus of the Stoic concepts here. And he had a great quote, which I love, which is happiness and freedom. And this is like freedom from worry, right? Begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control and some things are not. And I think that's the main aspect of Stoicism is just accept life as it comes. Life is going to have ups and downs. And if you accept that and don't let yourself react to the, how you choose to react to things that happen is on you. And so Stoics tend to have this kind of self-discipline that says, I can be happy and I can be free from worry and concern if I just accept the world the way it is. And they characterize this in something they call the Stoic happiness triangle. And so there's kind of three pieces to that triangle. One piece is this idea of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is the idea of a flourishing life. So the ancients thought that we have a higher self within us, kind of like we think in Christianity, we have a soul. And if we're on good terms with our higher self, that is, if we live out who we're meant to be, then we're going to flourish in life. And so there's three pieces of that. Sorry, letting a couple more people in here. First thing is take responsibility for your own happiness. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. The second piece on the left-hand side here is live with arete. So arete, the word for virtue, okay? So virtue just means express the highest version of yourself in the moment. So Stoics believe that we have a higher calling, and we are trying to live out that. And I think that's a really strong Christian philosophy for me anyway. And then the third piece is to make the best use of whatever's in your power and be satisfied you've done what you can do. So A Stoic says, do your best, and then what happens, happens, but if you can be happy knowing that you took your best shot. I remember thinking about that probably as a school child and coming up maybe with a difficult exam or something, and I would study and maybe I would do well, maybe I didn't do poorly, or maybe I do poorly. But if I felt like I had done my best, if I had tried my best in a class or in an exam, then I could be happy with what I've done. The same thing with sports. And I probably more than anything else in my children, I try to encourage that. Take your best shot and then be happy with what it comes, knowing that you took your best shot. And that's what you have control of. I have some quotes here, and I kind of compare, in some cases, some of the quotes from the Stoics and some of the Bible verses. And one of the first principles here is this idea of living by virtue. And we talked about that just a second ago, the arete. So Mark Aurelius said real clearly, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, right? Don't. The details are not important. It's more important to be striving for it. And that's a fundamental principle of Stoicism, is the idea of practicing, just always growing, not just philosophizing about things, but trying to put things into practice. I found that to be very comparable to Philippians 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's any excellence in anything worthy of praise, dwell on those things. And I have really tried to make a point in the last few years of really focusing on what are the true things, what are the honorable things. One of the reasons why I enjoy nature so much is that I think you can always appreciate the loveliness of it. And as a Stoic, I also try to just appreciate the loveliness in any situation. Even if there are bad parts of it, there are always good parts of it, and I kind of tend to focus on those. And same thing, trying to just live with virtue and dwell on the good parts of life. The 4 cardinal virtues that they talk about in Stoicism are, you saw that in the video, this idea of wisdom, or some people say prudence, right? Deliberation, good judgment, perspective, good sense. So Stoics would always say, try to understand the situation, try to apply your knowledge of things. In fact, try to avoid reacting emotionally to things if you haven't thought through what the consequences of reacting that way might be. The idea of justice or fairness, right? So being good-hearted towards people, benevolent. A lot of the Christian thinking, I think, gets to this idea of justice or fairness, right? Deal fairly with everybody. Certainly, Stoics would believe that. The idea of taking courage, they see courage as bravery and perseverance. The idea of, it's not a Pollyannic approach. We know that bad things will happen in life. You need a little bit of courage because you're going to have illness, you're going to have accident, disease, etc. Unhappiness is going to come into your life, but you need to be a little bit brave about that. And part of that idea of fortitude is also just authenticity or honesty. I did a survey about 10 years ago at a conference, and we were looking at, took one of those tests that people take to see what kind of leader they are, what kind of personality they have, etc. This was a test called Fascinate by a lady named Sally Hogshead. I thought with a name like that, you got to have a good message here. But Sally spoke to us, and something that she said really meant a lot to me. She said, you have to focus on authenticity more than anything else. That if you're focusing on being authentic, if you know who you are, and you focus on acting consistent with how you know who you are, you're always going to feel more comfortable in your own skin. That uncomfortable parts of life come when we're trying to be something that we have a sense that we're not, or if you're not aware of who you are and acting on authenticity with that. And that, I think, has really shaped my work life more than almost anything else, is to just think about who I am as a Christian in the business world, and what does a Christian do in a situation? And sometimes it's a question of, pushing yourself more, right? I remember, thinking I got into this field to teach, to give back. And there's some situations where, I'm being asked to give and I don't feel like it. I'm tired. I'm worn out. But I think, this is the whole reason you got into this, Rick. This is who you are. You're a teacher. That's who you are fundamentally. I found the same parallels with being a parent. I think I was born to be a dad. And there's certainly times in your life where your kids are asking for things that, your time and energy that maybe you feel tired or you have other preferences. But if you can say, hey, first and foremost, I'm a dad, and here's what a dad does in this kind of situation, I think that really gives you that kind of confidence and courage.
Rick, question?
Yeah, Jim. Yeah,
so
sure.
A minute ago, you said Sally.
Hogshead.
So what was it? How did that?
Hogshead.
How is she accessible? Is she on tape or on what?
Yeah. What I'm going to do for everybody is I'm going to put a series of references up on the website when we put the video up. Put a whole bunch of websites, and I'll put up Sally's website.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
her site is fascinate.com, and you can take her survey for about, I think it's about $20, and it was eye-opening for me, at least.
Good.
And then the fourth discipline, fourth virtue, self-discipline, temperance, right? Self-control. And that's kind of the part when we think about Stoic as a word we use colloquially, right? We think of self-control or even unfeeling. It's not unfeeling, it's control. So something bad happens. It's not that I don't feel sad about it. It's just that I control the way I react to it, right? And I think humility goes along with that, and forgiveness goes along with that, right? You know that other people are having bad days too, and you need to help bolster their courage and forgive them for anything that's, Stoics are not quick to anger. You can't rattle Stoic very easily if they're really practicing all this. And I keep saying the word practice, and one of the things we'll talk about later on is a good Stoic does all kinds of exercises to continue to practice, because it's not necessarily easy or straightforward. Sometimes like it's not easy to be a good Christian. Sometimes it's not easy to be a good Stoic. So questions on anything as we go forward?
Is there anybody here from Stanford? Are these unique to Stanford, the cardinal sins?
Oh, jeez.
Oh, Rick, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's
only have good questions from now on, though, okay?
Oh, I was looking from Berkeley. But anyway, what is its position or ideas towards social change versus the status quo? Because it sounds to me in some ways, like from a couple of things you said, or the little picture of the slave. The slave wasn't doing anything to get out of being a slave, and it was only really talking about the slaveholder and the people around him holding back the whip.
Right.
So what does a slave do, or what does a low-income person who is born into a certain situation and is told that they are lower class, they're not good? Do they just accept that as their?
Right. If they can't change it, they would accept that. They'd make the most out of being a slave. So you'd be just like they talked about the gentleman in the concentration camp. It's like, can I get out? If I could, I have some responsibility to change the world to be better. Right. That's taking responsibility. Right. That's certainly part of it. And instead of a fairness, right? If I thought something was happening unfairly, like I could stop slavery, I would do that. Right. But if I'm stuck in a bad situation that's happening to me, I will, and I can't change it. I'm going to accept that and try to do the best. I'm in a concentration camp. Later on, I'm going to talk about Paul. Paul's a perfect example, right? Tortured, beaten, imprisoned. Paul didn't react negatively to that. He said, "Yeah, this is my lot in life. This is what I suffer as being Christian. But I know it's furthering the Christian faith, so I accept my faith and make the best of my situation."
Right.
Except that Paul had been on the reverse side. Earlier in his life, he had been the one doing the torturing, etc.
Yeah.
So he had a
and-
larger perspective.
And Christianity changed that perspective, which is, I think, the same thing for a Stoic. If you came to Stoicism, you might change your perspective. If you were a slaveholder, you might say, gosh, out of a sense of fairness, probably being a slaveholder isn't a good thing. That's a great lead into this discussion, which is about focusing on what you can control and accepting what you can't. And I put a couple of quotes here from Epictetus, I can't say it, and Seneca, who talks about that idea of accepting, right? And I don't know, everybody has a favorite book in the Bible. Mine is Proverbs. I just keep finding all kinds of wisdom in there. But this idea of trust in the Lord with your own heart, lean not on it in understanding. In other words, you have to accept that what's going on is there, right? And also in Psalms, another one of my favorites. So a lot of times the way Stoics will do this is they'll talk in terms of parables, very much like Jesus. And they use a parable of the archer. They say, well, let's say you've got an archer and they're trying to hit a target, right? Well, what are the things that they can control? Well, they can control the amount of training and practice that they have. They can control what bow and arrow they're going to use. They can control their aim, when to let go of the arrow, how to hold the arrow, etc. They can control everything up until the point that the arrow leaves the bow. Okay, now, will they hit the target? Well, that's really not up to them at that point. Once the arrow leaves the bow, there could be a gust of wind, there could be a movement of the target, something could go wrong with the arrow, things could happen. But if you're a Stoic archer, you just accept all those possible outcomes with equanimity, right? Hey, this is just what happened because you've done your best. You've done all you can do. And then the other parts that you cannot control, that's what it is. So we like to make lists of things. So things that are up to us, thoughts, judgments, actions, and things like everything else, right? Not this. It's interesting. Body they put there because your body can get disease and decay and other things, and certainly there are things you can do to try to keep healthy, and we're not saying ignore any of that. But to some extent, some things that can happen to you, right? And you deal with that. It's interesting, the perception of death. I find, very much, Christians don't fear death, right? It's part of the process, and Stoics would see it the same way, right? Death is just something that's going to happen. I'm not going to get out of it. I'll accept that it happens. I will certainly not seek it, and I'll not have reckless behavior, but I will do that. Same thing with the sort of things that we normally measure our success with, things like health and wealth and stuff like that. We can't do that, and especially other people's actions. I have one group of Christian men I talk with on a regular basis, and we talk about staying in our lane and other people's lanes, right? How other people react to things is up to them. How I deal with that, how I react, how I present myself, that's up to me. So I think this, to me, is kind of one of the most appealing parts of Stoicism. We're responsible for our flourishing, right? Because all the things that really matter in life are up to us. And to me, when I came to this realization, a huge weight was lifted off of my shoulders. I quit trying to control the world, right? And focused on what is my reaction to the world. Doesn't keep me from trying to stop injustice, doesn't keep me from trying to help out those in need. That's part of the equation, right? But if somebody doesn't want my help, if somebody doesn't accept my help, if I can't fix something, that's okay. I've given it, the best college try in John Hugin's cardinal reference here. Okay, questions about things in our lane, things in other people's lanes? I don't know if any of this is resonating with you guys. This really resonated with me.
I would think
Yeah, it totally resonated with me too. Sorry, I just wanted to say like, thank you. This is great.
Good,
Yeah,
Good.
it is.
good, yeah.
I got another question.
Sure.
I would think it'd be difficult to be Stoic raising a teenager.
It is, but if you look at a lot of it's interesting, sort of modern self-help books are kind of coming around to this idea of reframing your discussion. I remember going to one of the parent meetings, they had like a sort of a TED Talk sort of program at Miracosta. And when our children were little, we went to there. And one of them, there was an author, and the author was encouraging us to reframe the way I think about our children. So for example, the children are not getting into trouble and touching and messing up everything. The children are incredibly inquisitive, right? Your children aren't interrupting you all the time. They're anxious to communicate with you. And he just encouraged us to kind of reframe what we tend to view in a negative light and view it in a positive light. Thank God our children are so smart that they want to participate in conversations with us. Thank God that they have such a great relationship that they want to participate with. And you're right, John, teenagers are challenging. I think I was incredibly blessed with two kids that bucked the trend. But whatever they did, we try to just view that in a positive light. Hey, yeah, it's not that they're defying our orders, that they have strong opinions about where they want to go. So I mean, that could be viewed as a positive thing. Question? Somebody else had a question or comment?
Well, I was going to ask about health.
Yeah.
Should I stop taking my pills?
No, because you're still responsible to to do all that you can do, right? Doesn't alleviate your responsibility, and you still seek wisdom, best things. So if you know the pills are good for you, that's fine. But if you take the pills and they don't help, accept that they didn't help, right? Maybe you try something else, or maybe you do something else, but you don't get massively depressed because what you tried didn't work.
Thank you.
Can I just say too, I love what you said about reframing. And so for me, it's kind of like perspective has been so important, like shifting my perspective on things. Because there were times when I had this just emotional freak out, and that really helps no one, least of all myself or anybody else that I'm, worried about or overwhelmed by. But then when I was able to kind of reshift, take a breath, take a pause, take a step back, and kind of go through some of the stuff that you're talking about here, it really shifted me. Like, I still want to do things. I still want to do good in the world, but I need to not react emotionally. I need to, right?
Yeah. And if you think about those, that's a great observation. You think about those kind of emotional reactions, they typically don't help. Quite often they hurt things worse, right? And if nothing else, they take you out off the sideline. Our coach in football used to always say, don't get angry. When you get angry, we lose you as the ability to help, right? You can be focused, you can be determined, don't get angry. Losing your emotions sidelines you. And so you want to stay in the game, you manage your emotions. You don't react to things where you don't need to react. So part of that, through I think a Stoic distinguishes between things that are good, things that are bad, and things that they can feel indifferent about, right? And the indifferent group is large. So things good, right? We talked about the four virtues: wisdom, temperance, justice, courage, right? Bad things would be like indulgence, right? Wastefulness, right? Folly. Oops, I put folly twice here, but injustice. But the big thing is there's a big group of categories in the indifferent things. They're just outcomes of things. They're not inherently good or bad. I might prefer one outcome over the other, but they're not that. And what you see a lot of times when you read sort of the quick articles on Stoicism is they talk about pleasure and pain. A Stoic makes no distinction between pleasure and pain. And I think that's oversimplifying it. I think a Stoic recognizes that pleasures and pain are both possible outcomes. And it's maybe rethinking or reframing the outcome sometimes, or sometimes it's just accepting that, hey, I did all I could, I I practiced, I went up to my turn at bat and I struck out. And, you know, hey, I had my best shot. And it might be painful, it might hurt, but I can put that as not inherently good or bad, but just as something indifferent. It's not something for me to rail against. I don't slam my bat down. I don't, you know, cry. I don't yell at the other team, right? It's just like, I had my turn at bat. It wasn't the outcome I wanted. Let's see. There's some interesting discussions. Friedrich Nietzsche and some of his philosophies talked about that, and he kind of helped frame this idea of amor fati. Amor fati says, just love life, live it, love it, whatever it turns out, right? Just enjoy all parts of it because it's all experience, right? Love life as it comes to you. We're going to talk more of that, right? Let me give another quick example, right? So another Stoic story is, you know, consider a dog, you know, tethered to a wagon, right? So the dog's got two choices. The dog can run joyfully alongside the wagon and keep up with it and be happy, or the dog could grumble about it and fight against it, and the thing can drag along the cart anyway, right? So you can accept the things you can accept. You know, you can't change the leash, you can't change the fact that the cart is moving, right? So you can just either enjoy the ride or you can fight against it and get dragged along. And so Amar Fati says, enjoy the ride. It could be a wonderful time if you kind of go with the flow here. I have seen some really interesting examples of this kind of played out, and one of the ones that you may know about is a story about Thomas Edison. So back in 1914, he was kind of at the height of his popularity. There was a massive explosion in West Orange, New Jersey, where his laboratories were. About half of his sites, over 10 buildings in that huge plant that he had there, were completely engulfed in flames. And the fire departments, you know, it's the biggest fire they'd seen in West Orange at that point in time, and I think maybe 6, 7, or 8 fire departments rushed to that scene, but there were chemicals involved, and there was just no way they were going to put the fire out. So it was just going to clearly range and burn these buildings to the ground. And Edison was there, and so was his son. And he just walked over to his son, his name was Charles, and said, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." So here's somebody saying half his life's work is being destroyed, and he's saying, "Oh, you know, wow, what an amazing fire." Get your mom. She'd enjoy seeing a fire this amazing. So that's a Stoic. That's the way a Stoic views things, right? I think Paul was a Stoic, and his verses, you know, reading through Philippians, he actually believed that what had happened to him was crucial to the faith, right? That he suffered his losses to bring him closer to Christ and to bring others to Christ, others that could see that things were not going perfectly in his life by any chance, right? He's whipped with lashes at least 5 different times we know of. He's beaten with rods at least 3 times we know of. He was pummeled with stones at one point. He was shipwrecked 3 times. I mean, this guy was having a bad day, and yet I think a lot of people were brought to Christ because they saw him and said, somehow he still has joy. How can he have joy when all these bad things are happening? And Paul said, hey, the joy comes from within. God gives me the joy. It's not what happens in the world. So
Rick, I'm going to ask you a question, which maybe you can't answer. No, maybe it's not answerable, but the early version of Paul was Saul.
Yeah.
When he was, going after doing, persecuting, including like Jesus. Do you want to speculate as to whether the early Saul was a Stoic?
No, I think he certainly his actions don't indicate Stoicism, right? He had no sense of fairness.
Only when he
He-
transitioned to Paul.
That's right, exactly.
Okay.
And I think that's the power of transformation, kind of like early Stoics did, by discussing the concepts, they did that. And, it's about practicing your faith. It's not about saying, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. It's about finding everyday places in your life to practice your faith. And I really like to end my day and think, what did I do today that showed the world that I was a Christian? Not for the point of showing the world, but just for the fact of practicing my Christianity. If I want to be a great concert pianist, I'm going to have to practice every day. If I want to be a great Christian, I'm going to have to practice every day. Stoics certainly believe that, and I will share with you some of their practices that they used. Good. Other questions?
Can you be a Stoic and also be an atheist?
Let's see. I think you could, John, because there are parts. Just because you're Stoics doesn't mean you believed in a higher order to the universe, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a higher power or what we view as God, right? But you believe that there was kind of a greater meaning to life, kind of like the Zen Buddhist sort of concept, right? You don't have to necessarily believe in a God, but there is some higher order that we're called to. For me, that becomes personified in a Holy Trinity. But I think you could do it. You could be a Stoic and be an atheist.
Thank you.
So this idea of reframing it, come back to this, right? Turning obstacles into opportunities, right? So it's all about your perception, right? So just another quick little Stoic example. Suppose you're trying to help somebody and they respond by being nasty or surly or uncooperative or unappreciative, right? You help a homeless person out and they spit on you. Okay. So what? So the Stoics challenge is view that as a positive, right? So if somebody does not react well, this is a chance to test whether you're a good Christian or not. This is a chance to test whether you were serious about helping, because if you're helping somebody because that's the right thing to do, it doesn't make any difference how they respond to it. It's still the right thing to do, right? It doesn't say, Jesus said, help out people if they appreciate it. He said, help others, right? So you can view the lack of reaction. And I love this in terms of dealing with people calmly in a discussion, right? We've all had a situation where we talked to somebody and they reacted very negatively or nasty, or we tried to reach out to apologize for something that we did and the person didn't accept the apology very nicely and use it as an opportunity to bash us. And it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to learn out of this situation? And I think that's a lesson I always try to take. When things are not going the way I plan, my prayer is always, God, show me what I'm supposed to have learned here. Help me to have figured this out. A few years ago, I read a book called The Celestine Prophecy, very popular at the time. And one of the major principles out of that book was the belief that the universe is conspiring to make you a better person. That if you have a weakness in your life, that the universe will keep bringing together circumstances to try to give you a chance to practice on improving that. And that struck me when I read that, and I have looked for that now. When something negative happens, I try to think, how am I supposed to grow out of this experience? Gosh, my good friend got cancer and died. Okay, maybe that makes me a more compassionate person. Maybe that helps me to understand that better. I fall out of the tree and break my arm. Okay, well, now I'm more compassionate for people in a similar situation. I know what they're going through. I could comfort somebody who had a broken arm or had something similar happen to them, because I've been through that sort of experience. And so you look at these obstacles, opportunities. You look at opportunities that they could potentially be obstacles too. And so I got a little video here that I think kind of frames this discussion of kind of viewing things.
Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Why, that's great, isn't it?" And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round at the evening and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And he said, "Maybe." The whole process of nature is an integrated process of immense complexity, and it is really impossible to tell whether anything that happens in it is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequences of a misfortune, or you never know what will be the consequences of good fortune.
So that's the Stoic philosophy, I think, kind of in a nutshell.
You know, Rick, I had an experience in LA where I was down at the bottom of a hill, and a car coming down the hill was just screaming down 95 miles an hour. And there was a little old lady who obviously couldn't hear, couldn't see much, and she was crossing the street. And I just reacted, and I grabbed her by the arm and carried her across the street, just pushed her across the street so she wouldn't get run over. And she turned around and she smacked me with her pocketbook and said, "How dare you? How dare you?" And the friends that I was with said, "Just goes to show you, Emery, no good deed goes unpunished." We laughed at the time, but this is sort of what you're talking about. And it just takes a while for it to sink in.
From her experience, it was something unpleasant, but from a broader perspective, it was something amazingly good for her.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you my story. A few years ago, after my divorce from Connie, I was single, and some of you remember I had a little red sports car, a little Mazda RX-7, and I loved that red sports car. It was the joy of my life. And I was over at the church helping with one of the youth programs, and while I was inside helping the youth, someone stole the car out of the church parking lot. And I've lost my beloved sports car. Boy, that's a good time to kind of react negatively to things. And luckily at the time, I just said, "God, what am I supposed to learn from this? You've let this happen for a reason. There's some message here. I don't know what that is." And as I ruminated about it, what I thought was, well, what do you really want in life? And what I really wanted to do was be a dad. And I said, and having a sports car like that, is that really attracting the sort of woman who wants to be a mom? No. And so I went out and replaced the car with this very dad-like 4-door sedan, right? And when I did, one of the women in the church looked at that car and looked at me and said, "This guy is different than I thought he was." And a few years later, Sue and I were married, and we have 2 beautiful children to show for that. So what some people might have considered one of the worst things that ever happened in life turned out to be the best thing that ever happened in my life. So that's my sense. You can never tell how things are going to turn out, because it's different than you might think it's going to be.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
Rudy and I really enjoyed driving around that little red sports car all the time too.
You know what kind of people we are.
Well, that's true. That's true. So I want to go back and people talked a little bit about this. Hey, can I tolerate injustice? And I can't. No, a part of the Stoic philosophy is to take action, because the true philosopher is a warrior of the mind, the way they would say it. So part of what actions they talk is training yourself. And there's some really good books. I like this one by Chakrapani, because it's just got a bunch of little exercises in it. So you got to train yourself to desire or avoid only things under your control. Don't seek to be famous or wealthy or other things that are outside your lane, right? Things you can't control. If you control things that you can control, then you can get what you want, right? I can control how I react today. I can control what I do today. And then I don't have any feeling of desire for anything, because I'm in control of the things that I can control, and I can make those things happen. So I still have to take responsibility of that. Also, training your mind to avoid hasty judgments. When things happen, don't think about it, right? Yeah, my car was stolen. Don't rail. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't know, right? Think about it. Train to see things that are. If you can recognize the world as it is, right, and not add your own personal judgment to everything, right? Doesn't mean you won't judge things, but you'll try to judge things based upon universal truths, not personal bias, right? Oh, I hate people who do that, so I'm going to judge this person. Well, let me judge that person as they are, not one dimension of them that I happen to see and disagree with, right? I love 4. Be at home wherever you are. Barbara Fine years ago led a wonderful series of classes at the church on mindfulness. And a lot of mindfulness is just be happy in your own skin. Just recognize and be aware of the amazing things that are there. And I think that has become increasingly difficult, and something that less than 1% of the population does these days, because we're on our social media, we're looking at our website, we're checking emails, and I'm guilty of it too, right? I'm tempted to multiplex. I'm tempted to do other things, and I always have to come back to this mindful practice of just saying, well, right now I'm here. Who's here for me to talk to? What is here for me to see and enjoy and experience? How can I make the most out of this situation? Yeah, the bus is 10 minutes late, but here's somebody at the bus stop that I get a chance to talk to now that I will never get another chance to talk to. And maybe they've got some incredibly great wisdom to me, or some incredibly great experience to share with me. Here is my moment. Not railed at the fact that I'm sitting here for 10 minutes with nothing to do. Go engage them. And so I'm one of those annoying people that talk to strangers in public, because I just think everybody's got a fascinating story. Everybody's got some wisdom to share with me. It is fun to learn that. And occasionally people say, don't want to talk to me, and that's okay too. But I tend to be a talker, right? And if you have small children, I'm going to say hello to your small children and see if they have any wisdom for me, because I think little kids have most of the wisdom, and we as adults have forgotten about that. So I will try to do it in a way that's not threatening your children in any way, but I'm going to talk to kids because I just love to hear their sides of things. And then finally, just training your mind, training yourself to want whatever happens. Amor fati, right? Love life. Here's what happens. I'm just going to love the fact that it was a cool experience. Great quote from Seneca. I may wish to be free from torture, but if the time comes for me to endure it, I'll wish to bear it courageously and with bravery and honor. Would I prefer it to not fall into war? Sure. But if war does befall me, I'll wish to carry nobly the wounds, starvation, other necessities of war. Neither am I so crazy as to desire illness, but if I must suffer illness, I wish to do nothing rash or dishonorable. The point is not to wish for these adversities, but for the virtue that makes adversities bearable. So the virtues, the 4 virtues principles all go together. The virtue, living a virtuous life of integrity is part of the way that we bear the unpleasantries that will come to us. I mentioned practice, and one of the principles of Stoicism is to practice misfortune. Okay. And that's, they call this premeditation of adversity, right? So you can avoid some emotional suffering if you think through and ask yourself in any situation what could go wrong, and then make preparations for that. So, you know, a good example here is your family's preparing for vacation. You've packed, you got airline tickets, you've packed your stuff, you know, got somebody to watch the house and the dog and everything, right? And all the plans, etc. you've made. And then say, well, what could go wrong? And think about the fact that there will be solutions for that. Like, well, what if we get there and they cancel the flight? Well, what would we do then? Well, what if we got to the hotel and everything was booked up? What would we do then? And not to think negatively, not to be depressed, but just to have backup plans for everything. Okay, well, if they cancel the flight, we'll take another flight. It's not going to be the end of the world. And that way, when some of these adversities happen, number one, sometimes you've got backup plans. And number two, you've recognized that I got options, right? If something bad happens, I got to do something else, right? Some of the most amazing experiences I've had were when my plans went awry. And I think back on some of those and think I would have never had that opportunity if it hadn't gone awry. Zig Ziglar, great salesman, and has written a lot of books, and relates a story, or they relate a story about him where he's in an airport, and he goes up to the ticket counter, and the ticket agent says, "No, I'm sorry, Mr. Ziegler, but your flight was canceled. There won't be another flight out of here for 4 hours." And he goes, "Terrific." She goes, "Terrific? What do you mean terrific?" He goes, "I have flown through this airport a dozen times. I have never had any chance to check out any of it. I'm always kind of rushing through this airport right before my flight. Now I got 4 hours to explore all the cool stuff that somebody created in this airport for my pleasure and enjoyment. That's amor fati. That's enjoying life where it is." Okay, there's lots of Bible verses here, right? That reflect on this, that are consistent with this. I love the Philippians 4:8, so I'm going to give it to you again here. But Romans 12:2 is another way to say this. Don't be conformed to the world. Don't react in the world. Recognize you're a child of God. Renew your mind. You know, discern what's the will of God and accept that, right? The things are happening the way that they're supposed to happen. What's the positive way to deal with that, right? If you do that, you will have a good life. And since I have adopted some of these principles, I have more joy in my life than I can possibly imagine. It is an amazingly wonderful life, and there are amazingly wonderful things that happen out there if you're accepting things as they come. Okay, I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts here. I've kind of shared some of the little practices they do. There's a lot of other practices. These are things we try to do on a daily basis. I will make an unabashed plug for this book called The Daily Stoic. One of my good friends gave it to me. I just love it because it's a short page each day with a meditation and some practical applications of that. It's very, very useful. You can go to thedailystoic.com and see the same kind of stuff online. It's very useful. And then the references below, and I'll put all these up on the website so that you can just click on them. The website below is kind of Stoicism 101. And if you want to go back over the details of Stoicism and the principles and the history and all that good stuff, that blog is the best understanding I've got it. There's also a daily newsletter by a couple people, Niels and Jonas, and I'll put that link up there as well. Niels and Jonas, I think, have a really, really practical way of how we can infuse Stoicism into our life more.
Rick?
Yeah.
What does ephemeral mean? I've heard the word, it doesn't. Ephemeral?
It's all stuff that happens. It's all outside of our control, right?
Okay.
Ephemeral. My sense of it, John, it's all tangential to the meaning of life, right? It's not fundamental stuff.
Okay.
Right? Fundamental stuff is about being a good person and living a good life. Okay. That's the end of my prepared charts. I'm happy to have some more discussion, talk about some stuff, whatever people want to do here. Good. Anybody else practice some of these principles?
Well, am I on mute?
No, you're okay.
You're up. You're open.
We just,
Rosie.
as an example of one of the examples that you just gave, we had some friends the other day who had planned to go to Hawaii, and they had this wonderful trip planned to get there. And they got to the airport, and which was about an hour from their home, and he couldn't get on the plane because he didn't have his vaccination certificate for COVID.
Right.
And so they said, okay, well, we're here. We're gonna just go wherever we can get the next plane out that looks like we can do that, and it may be fun and interesting. So they ended up coming to see us, which was a great treat for them. A great treat for us. But I think that to be able to have something like that happen in the airport and just say, okay, well, we're just going somewhere else. We'll get on the next flight wherever, is such a positive way to adjust to what could have been a traumatic event.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great example.
Are we having church in the parking lot this today, or is it just Zoom?
We are. That's why I kind of tried to end here pretty close to 9:30 to give everybody a chance here. So, all right. Well, I'd love to have more discussions with anybody who wants to come talk to me about it. And thank you for letting me share some of my thoughts on it.
So
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
So next Sunday, you there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next Sunday, we'll be joining CTJ for their virtual tour, this time a tour of ancient Jerusalem. Obviously dealing with the Christian sector of Jerusalem, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So that's next Sunday.
Last week was great.
It was superb. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
We have two more. After the third one will be Mount Zion, which I know very little about.
Great.
So that's what's on tap. So thank you,
Thank you,
Rick.
Jim.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Rick.
you. Thanks. Rick.
Thanks for all your work
Thank
on this,
you.
Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. I added that book to my Amazon wish list already.
Good, Rita. Thanks, everybody.
Added the book.
Thank you, Rick.
See you in church.
Very interesting.